Good evening and welcome to The Right Side, the show where we talk about today's news, views, trends, and opinions from an admittedly conservative perspective. I'm your host, Chris Pareja, and this evening we're joined by David Barton. He's the founder of WallBuilders, is known as America's historian, and amongst other things, just a wealth of knowledge. David, welcome to the show.
Chris, great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about something that's going to make people squeamish, but we're all about running for the third rail and sticking our tongue straight to it anyway. We're going to talk about government intrusion, and which shouldn't be controversial, and government overreach, except for that we're in a society where more and more often people believe that it's government's job to fix all your problems, make life fair, make it so that you can win out when you're competing in life. But that's not the way the country was set up.
Not the way it was, and you know, we have to make a distinction here to start with, because one of the things that's happened in the last 15, 20 years in American education, very overtly, about 30 years less overtly, has been we beat down America, because America is just not that great a place. We've seen our Supreme Court justices like Ruth Bader Ginsburg go overseas and say, don't copy the American Constitution. I mean, very openly say that. We've seen the president go to other nations and apologize for America. People are supposed to feel guilty for America, and they're very specifically taught that. As a matter of fact, we had recently a school district in Colorado, just outside Denver, where they said, you know, we're beating up America, but there's a lot of things to like about America, and so we want our teachers to start including positive things about America. The teachers walked out of the school, said, we will not, if we have to teach good things about America, we will not teach. The kids walked out in sympathy with the teachers, said, we don't want to hear good things about America. So we have become so overt that we're actually saying that. To put this in perspective, we've had one piece of paper under which we've governed ourselves for 238 years. Nobody else comes close. If you're 95 years old, you're alive in Poland today, you have lived through 7 constitutions and 7 revolutions. If you're a baby boomer in South Korea, you've been through 6 constitutions. You just go down the list. I think Venezuela's had 25 constitutions since we've had one. France has had 15. I think Brazil's had 21. Haiti's had 17. It's unbelievable. You just take the 195 nations at the UN, and they tend to average a revolution or a new constitution every generation or so. We've had one since 1789. We've had the Declaration since 1776. We govern ourselves that way. So we're stable. We think that's normal. It's not. We are different. Why? That's where you get into American government that we used to teach. We don't teach this much anymore, but the Founding Fathers in the Declaration of Independence announced to the world why they said they felt compelled to tell the world why they were doing what they're doing. So they start out with 126 words that set forth 5 principles of American government. Every clause of the Constitution goes to one of those 5 principles. That's the whole philosophy of government, and the applications through the Constitution. They then gave 27 grievances showing how those 5 principles were being violated, and they close at the end with their declaration and they sign it. So if you take those principles that they set forth, those 126 words, pretty simple stuff. First thing they say is, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They're endowed by their Creator. So right up front, first thing they do is, there's a God. And the reason that becomes significant is throughout all history, if government doesn't know there's something higher than it, it thinks it is God. And at the point it thinks it is God, it takes control of every aspect of life, micromanaging. All you have to do is look at secular societies across Europe, see what they do. You can take France, you can take Turkey, you can take Spain, Portugal, you can take any of them and see how they micromanage every aspect of life. You can take Denmark, where your base tax rate is 68%. How about that for less government? No. When everything you own belongs to the government. So the founders said, no, first off, there is a Creator, which is the announcement that government, you're limited. You're not the chief thing in our lives. You're not the highest authority. There's something higher. Then they go on to say that by the Creator, we're endowed with certain inalienable rights. And those inalienable rights are real key, because those who helped write that document, from John Dickinson to James Wilson to Samuel Adams to John Adams, they defined inalienable. And in all cases, they said inalienable rights are those that are given by God before the existence of any government. The first government in human history was that given in Noah, what are called the Noahide laws. There are 7 categories of laws. That's the first government that ever existed in the history of mankind. Founding Fathers said inalienable rights are the rights that came before civil government. So before man had government, there were certain rights that came from God, and they identified about 24 rights that were God-given rights. And so they said, all right, since these rights come from God. Government, you can't regulate it. And it kind of works this way. I am from Texas. I am literally a cowboy. We got the ranch and the horses and cattle and all the stuff that go with it. And I've got a red Ford pickup. I love it. I look out in the parking lot. You got a pickup. Yours is not red. I love red. I'll go spray paint your pickup red. I can't do that. I can spray paint anything I want red if it belongs to me, but I can't spray paint things that don't belong to me. And so by saying that there are certain inalienable rights, they've just created jurisdictions. They said, government, you can regulate what belongs to you, but there's certain things that don't belong to you, and you can't go over your neighbor's yard and start regulating stuff. So by saying there's inalienable rights, there's about 24 things they put off limits to government. They listed 3 in the Declaration: life, liberty, and property. And then 11 years later, when they did the Bill of Rights, they said, you know, we told you that among others there were 3. Let us give you some more. The First Amendment right to worship God according to the dictates of conscience. The Second Amendment right to defend yourself. The Third Amendment right on the sanctity of the home. The Fourth Amendment right for justice. The Fifth Amendment right for property protection. They go to all these others. So those were all set aside that government cannot mess with those rights because they don't belong to government. They didn't come from government. The next thing they said in the Declaration is that to secure these rights, what rights? Well, they just listed inalienable rights. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. They've just told us the purpose of government. It's not to make sure we all have a job or prosperity or health care. It's to make sure that government protects those 24 rights and doesn't mess with them. That gives us liberty and freedom. That's where the freedoms come from. So you start with that philosophy. Now, we've gotten away from that, and in recent years, there's been a move with a number of state legislators to do what they call Celebrate Freedom Week. And Celebrate Freedom Week, by state law in those states, requires that once every year, from the 3rd through the 12th grade for 9 years, the kids have to learn those 126 words out of the Declaration, memorize them, and they have to spend a week studying the Declaration, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights.
Which is a week more than most people get.
Well, by federal law, September the 17th is called Constitution Day. It's when they signed the Constitution in 1787. By federal law, every public school district in America is to set aside for Constitution Day and study the Constitution. 90% of public schools do not comply with that federal law at all, won't even touch it. And to show you how much they object to that principle that there's something higher than government, that there's rights government shouldn't touch, and that government exists to protect those rights, when this bill was brought up in New Jersey, they had a debate on the floor of the legislature in New Jersey and tried to amend the Declaration of Independence because they didn't like the wording that was there. We disagree with that philosophy. And so they tried to rewrite it to be what they wanted it to be. So this is the core philosophy on which we were founded. And if you take that, take something as simple as property rights. And by the way, the 4th thing you find in the Declaration, the 4th of the 5th points, is there are certain guaranteed fixed morals. And the Founding Fathers called that the laws of nature and of nature's God. The chief law book of that day defined those 8 words. And under the laws of nature, you don't need anything in the scripture or religion to know what's right and wrong. So when you look at nature, for example, it is a law of nature to defend yourself. Self-defense, I ride horses all the time. I take care of my horses, but when mare has a foal, I go in there, got a great relationship with that horse. I get around that brand new foal, she'll put a hoof print right in the middle of my forehead. It just kicks into her that I will defend my young. I'll chase you out of my barn when my young are here. It's in her nature to defend her life, her family's life, and her property. Now, it's interesting, we also raise sheep, and this past winter we had a ewe that she would go down, lie down in the pasture at night, and we had a little kitten. And this kitten, for whatever reason, bonded up with that ewe and would go crawl under that wool and stay warm at nighttime.
Four-legged blanket. It sounds like
exactly right.
Good idea.
And these two, they had a blast. They'd play in the pasture together, you know. But that ewe ended up having twins. And the nights that she had those twins, that kitten went out to crawl under that ewe like she always did, and that ewe just pounded her into the ground. Now, Congress cannot pass a law to keep ewes from pounding kittens in the ground if you get close to the young, because it's a law of nature that I will defend my family. You can't stop that. So, therefore, government exists to protect the right of self-defense. Government exists to make sure I have the right to defend my family, my property, and my own life. Same thing with property. From the time that something is born into earth, doesn't matter whether it's a snake, a rat, doesn't matter what it is, it will find something and stake it out as its own property. It will live there. It will be part of where it is. When it dies, something else will take it, you know, but they all have property during their lifetime. And so the Founding Fathers said property rights don't come from government, they come from God. Government can protect property rights. And this is where the Founding Fathers got very specific. James Madison, for example, said one of the greatest property rights is the right of conscience, the right to believe. That's my property. What goes on up here, that's my property. You can't regulate my right of conscience unless you're the government today and tell Hobby Lobby what they can and can't do,
or Chick-fil-A,
or Chick-fil-A or anybody else. See, we're violating conscience, and by the Declaration, that's part of my property. Thomas Jefferson said your income is your property, because what you've done is you've exchanged hours of your life, your blood, sweat, tears, for money. That money is who you are. I've exchanged me for that money, and government exists to protect property, which is income, which is why they didn't do income taxes. Because what they had was capitation taxes. We changed that in 1913 through the 16th Amendment to income taxes. But the Founding Fathers and the Constitution, they discouraged direct taxes. And direct taxes where they take your income, because government's supposed to protect your property, not take your property. They also did that through the capital gains tax. As James Madison points out, and Ben Franklin as well, to take from someone who's made more to give to someone who's made less is to take their property away and distribute that property to someone else. So now you're into socialism, and that's not, government's not supposed to do that. Government's supposed to protect property. If I make more than you, I should keep more than you. I don't have to give it to you. So that's property protection. James Madison also said that when the government comes in and tries to regulate your property through zoning ordinances, that they're taking your property. They're acting like it's their property, telling you what you can do on their property. No, that's your property. And so we have across the country now, there's a movement going to zone churches out of business. Stafford, Texas, 53 churches. They want to be a church-free town. And they're telling all the churches, here's what you can and can't do. We had, I think it was in Portland, Oregon, a little Methodist church of, what is it, 500 people, I think? And the city council there said, well, we think you should only have 80 people on your church property. So they're telling the church they can only have 80 people on their own property? You got to be kidding me.
Controlling congregation.
Controlling congregation, but churches, private property, property owners, through zoning regulations, that's not protecting your property, that's taking it. And the other thing that Madison said was for the government to take property from one and give it to another, eminent domain, anything else, is a violation of property rights. So that's an inalienable right, and you look at all the ways that that's applied. It's applied to income, it's applied to belief and conscience, it's applied to how you live, your zoning, what you do on your own property. All of that was to be protected by government. Now look how regulated it is. So we've lost those fundamental concepts of those 126 words, those 5 principles, and that's where freedom comes from.
Right.
And the more government you have, the less freedom you have, but it's interesting. The Founding Fathers, of the 5 principles, 4 of them were God-centered. Mm-hmm. They believed you could only have liberty if you knew that certain things came from God and government wasn't to touch them.
Right.
If you walk inside the Jefferson Memorial to this day, you find engraved in stone a quote from his 1781 book called Notes on the State of Virginia. And he said, "Can the liberties of a nation be thought secure if we remove their only firm basis, which is a conviction in the minds of the people that these liberties are of the gift of God and are not to be violated but with His wrath?" He said, "Indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just and His justice won't sleep forever." Now that's your least religious Founding Father saying, guys, our liberties come from God. If we ever lose that concept, we'll lose our liberties. So you find that the more secular a nation becomes, the less liberties they have.
Right.
America has now fallen out of the top categories. We're no longer considered the freest nation in the world. We're now down about 14 or 15 on the list, and that's all been in recent years. We're just plummeting. Last year in Congress, there were 127 laws passed by Congress last year, signed by the President. There were 3,450 laws that went into the federal law books that were not signed by the President, not passed by Congress. They were regulatory laws. We've had 80, let's see, since 1993, we've had 81,000 new federal laws passed without going through Congress, simply come out of regulatory law books. That's not freedom.
No.
We've got all sorts of stuff happening now that's taking freedom away, and the more secular we become, the less we recognize jurisdictions that, you know, God gave me property rights. Government, you stay out of them.
Right.
God gave me the right to express my faith. Government, stay out of it. God gave me the right to my home. You can't regulate my home. till we get back to that, we won't have the freedoms we had.
So how much of that is because people have lost touch completely with the founding documents versus it's been indoctrinated out of them versus... but also Congress is regularly relinquishing their power to lobbyists and others. They don't look at the legislation they're signing, they don't review it, and they make it so vague and leave it to the bureaucrats behind them. The question is there a way to turn the tables back?
Yeah, there's a way to turn the tables back, and one is by figuring out that government is not the solution for all of our problems.
Says someone outside the government.
Yes, says someone outside the government.
Inside the government, they would argue with you.
They argue that, and that's why, let's see, I think, what did I see today? That the average government employee makes 60% more than the private world does. And by the way, here's another one. 53% of the nation thinks that a top priority of government should be to help the poor. And they're willing to pay more taxes. That means helping the poor. They just don't have a clue what that means. Because right now, today, the government has 80 anti-poverty programs. 80 anti-poverty programs. You look at the amount of money we spent last year on anti-poverty programs, it averaged $61,000 per poor family. You find right now that if you're on welfare, you're making more than teachers make in 11 states. You're making more than secretaries make in 39 states if you're on welfare. Yep. So you have all these people working, and we keep saying, oh, give more to the poor. Wait a minute, 61,000 on average for what we spent in the family? Our definition of poor we don't even understand. And right now in America, we have 60% of Americans who receive more money from the government than what they pay into the government. You cannot survive at that rate. We have what's called the debt ratio. Now, the GDP people know about. The debt ratio is if we take the full force of the American economy and we let this thing go, how long would it take for the American economy to pay off the government's debt right now? And in 1980, it was 32 years. 1980, it would take 32 years of full force of the American economy to pay off the debt. Today, it's 109 years. And in 2032, when our kids take the reins, it'll be 190 years. The full force of the American economy will have to run for 190 years to pay off the debt that we've given our kids in 2032. There's no way you survive as a nation. So until we get cognizant of the fact that government can't do all and won't do all and doesn't do all, and by the way, here's another little piece of trivia, taking care of the poor. There are groups called like Charity Watch and American Institute of Philanthropy, and they monitor every charity in the United States. And so if I want to give money to a charity for whatever cause, they look at it and they tell me what % of my dollar actually meets the target. And they say that if 60 cents out of every dollar does not meet the target, don't give to that group. They'll let 40% be used on fundraising or staff or whatever. Right now, 70% out of every dollar designated for the poor doesn't reach them. Only 30 cents does out of the dollar.
So we're not going to misconstrue that and say that you're saying we shouldn't give any more money to the government.
Well, you know, if the government would take the money designated for the poor and give it to private groups, it would triple the amount that actually made the private groups.
But they would have to give up their power.
Exactly.
And that's the problem.
Exactly. And of course, they don't tell us what that looks like, because right now, according to figures from the Census Bureau, if you live in poverty in America, your lifestyle is higher than middle class in Europe. That's pretty wild. Now, that's not saying we don't have genuine poor people in America. We absolutely do. But see, what the problem is, we find black and white pictures out of the 1930s and run them on TV ads to help the poor. Right. Wait a minute. The poor today, we're talking about the
big
difference
TVs
whether it's 2 or 3. You're in poverty if you only have 2 and not 3. And I mean, the stats are out there. I mean, we've got a lot of the stats on the website, because I'm very much into helping the poor in a genuine way.
Right.
I'm not into helping the government waste the money, but I'm into helping the poor. And there's just too much we can do to genuinely do that. And I do it through private organizations, not through the government.
Well, but when you actually take the money and put it in the local communities where it will actually do good, and you cut out all that bureaucracy, it's just not expensive enough to be valuable.
That's exactly
That's
right.
the problem.
I actually get to keep some more of my money. I don't want to do that.
And help more people?
And help more people?
That's illogical. That can't happen.
The Founding Fathers are very clear that you need to keep money in the local community, spent in the local community, because you know the people who are actually there. We send it off to D.C. to faceless people who send it somewhere else, to Timbuktu, or who knows where they send it, because we never see it. And we don't have a connection with poor people because we give through the government. Right. When you have a connection to your community, you know the guy in the corner, and you know that he's dependent on what you give. And when you give him a buck, he's going to get a buck. When you give the government a buck, by the time he gets to him, he only gets 30 cents.
Right.
So it used to be the belief that the local stuff was the most effective, the most compassionate, and the most efficient way of giving. We've got to get back to that concept because the stats are real clear. I mean, this is not a hard thing. But that means we got to kind of wean ourselves off and actually get involved. That means I'm going to actually have to help that guy down, that veteran on the corner. I'm going to have to actually ask what I can do to help. I'd rather give it to the government than ask. Well, you got to get involved with people's lives.
You're compassionate with other people's money. It's much easier than actually having a direct relationship with the person you're helping.
That's right.
And, and with so much of it going out of our pockets anyway, it almost feels like we don't have enough left discretionarily to help that local guy anyway.
Well, and that's one of the things we're seeing right now is what has happened with the increase. The more we increase taking our money away, the less freedom we have. Thomas Jefferson actually said the problem with the British is they have taxed so heavily that you get to the point where that you have to work 16 hours a day to make ends meet, and 15 of the 16 hours go to taxes. You're left with that, and you get to the point you're willing to do anything. He said you'll actually let the government hire you to rivet chains on your neighbor's neck if that'll put food on your table. So you get to where that you'll do just about anything to keep your family going, but you've been giving up all the stuff along the way to where that 15 out of 16 hours now it takes to pay the taxation that's going on. So you literally become a slave of the government, and you'll do whatever they say if they'll keep feeding you. So, and that's a dangerous place to be.
So how do we start the weaning process? We've only got a couple minutes left. I mean, how do we make that stop? And
you got to get back to jurisdictions, because so much of the money is wasted in things that are not proper jurisdictions. I mean, just as a great example, right now in the last 5 years, the number of people on food stamps has gone to 19 million, from 19 million to 51 million. We now have
That's racist. You can't say that.
Well, but see, here's the thing. You can't even say it's racist now because, like, for example, the school lunch program started in 1946 by Harry Truman to help those who need lunch at school. The school lunch program is now available to every single kid in America, not the poor kids, every kid.
You don't want them to be embarrassed to have to take it.
Well, your parents make $46 million a week, and you get a free lunch from the government. Excuse me, that's not right. And so there's nothing racist about it because we're doing it for everybody, whether they need it or not.
Right.
So we now have more people on food stamps than the combined population of 24 states. 24 states, we got more people on food stamps. You got to wean yourself off that and say, you know, it is free money, but there's strings that go with it. And I'm going to turn it down. See, as a rancher, I can take a lot of government programs and get a lot of money, and I refuse to do so. That's my ranch. I'm going to work my tail off. I'm going to have my kids work their tail off. We're going to make that ranch work. That's not free money from the government. That's my money and my neighbor's money that's coming to me, and I don't want it.
But now you're talking about responsibility. Too. That's you can't.
Until you're willing to wean yourself, though, you can't win your government. It's just simple.
Where can people find out more about these radical ideas like responsibility and helping your neighbor? Do you have a website you want to direct them to?
WallBuilders.com, and it has all sorts of things. The stats are there on welfare, where we are. We keep up with current stats on government. We've got lots of books that deal with that. We've got lots of materials that really go in depth in this stuff. Current stats.
So again, WallBuilders.com.
WallBuilders.com.
All right, great. Dave, thanks for joining us this evening. If you hold on for just a moment, we'll be back after a word from our underwriters, the Conservative Forum.
The Conservative Forum of Silicon Valley began with 20 conservatives meeting at a restaurant in November of 2003. Our mission is to promote the principles of American liberty through education. By 2012, we had grown to over 600 paid members. Our monthly meetings feature well-known and prestigious conservative speakers addressing issues that are critical to our country's very survival. This includes speakers like Victor Davis Hanson, Andrew Breitbart, David Horowitz, and many others. In addition to our monthly meetings, we sponsor a conservative local cable access TV show, The Right Side, covering today's topics. Our Constitution discussion group not only teaches the Constitution, but started our annual essay contest that awards 2 $1,000 scholarships to local high school seniors. We are a virtual clearinghouse for grassroots organizations by providing them with table space at no charge in our exhibit area. There are typically a dozen groups represented. If you are like-minded, join us at our next meeting and become motivated and empowered. Liberty, made in America.
And that was a word from our underwriters, the Conservative Forum. We thank them immensely for making the show possible. Without them, it'd be dark here. We wouldn't be here. But we're glad to have them. The reality is, though, we're just a small part of what the Conservative Forum does. There are a number of different programs that they sponsor, and the thing that they're best known for is their speaker series. The reason we were able to get Dave to come to the show this evening is that he'll be speaking there tonight. And most of the time, what you'll find on the second Tuesday of the month is that there are great speakers that are speaking at the forum. In March, Dennis Michael Lynch, the producer of They Come to America, will be speaking. In April, John J. Miller will be speaking as part of the Hillsdale joint event. In May, Colonel Alan West will be speaking, and in June, Catherine Engelbrecht, the founder of True the Vote, will be in attendance. And so if you need more information about what's happening, time, cost, etc., you can find that at theconservativeforum.com. And in closing, Dave covered a lot of topics this evening about the overreach of government. And many of us have forgotten how little the government really is supposed to do. And even though it claims to do it on our behalf, there are always trade-offs. And the term strings attached is something that we should all be aware of. You can find a lot more information out about what those overreaches are and some of the stats, as Dave mentioned, again, at WallBuilders.com, WallBuilders.com, and get the information you need to be educated about what the government's doing to you as opposed to for you. On that note, we'd like to say thanks again for joining us this evening. This has been The Right Side. I'm your host, Chris Pareja, and I look forward to seeing you on the show or in person again sometime soon. But if you just can't wait, reach out to us at therightsidetv@gmail.com, and we'll try to address your questions there. Thanks, and have a great night.